Hey, fifth grade, here's chapter 12 of Jeremy Thatcher. Night Flights. I've got a chance, shouted Specimen when he heard the news. He was so excited he raced home to work on his entry as soon as school was over. Jeremy stayed behind, thinking about his conversation with Mr. Kravitz. He had told Spess only half of it. The personal part, the stuff about his own talent, he was keeping to himself. Normally he would have told Specimen everything, but lately he hadn't felt like talking to Spess so much. That shout of joy hadn't done anything to help matters. It was clear Specimen considered Jeremy's banishment from the contest fair punishment for getting the class in trouble to begin with. Jeremy was sick of it all, the teasing, the punishment, the injustice. He broke his favorite drawing pencil in half and threw it in the wastebasket. By the time he left the building, the only kid still hanging around was Mary Lou. She was waiting for him on the steps of the school. "That was a nice thing you did," she said. "I don't want to talk about it." Mary Lou started to say something else, then changed her mind. "We've got company," she said, switching the topic altogether. Jeremy looked around warily. Were Howard and Freddie waiting to pound him? "Wrong direction," said Mary Lou. "Look up." He did, turning in a slow circle until he spotted Tiamat looming on the edge of the school roof. She was staring down at him with a look that could only be the dragon version of a smile. The tip of her tail dangled down so far it nearly reached the windows. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "I came to take you home." Before Jeremy could ask what she meant, Tiamat leaped from the roof, spread her wings, and began to glide toward him. Her claws extended before her. "Tiamat," he yelled. "Tiamat, don't." "What's going on?" cried Mary Lou. Jeremy's reply was cut short when Tiamat grabbed him by his sides and snatched him into the air. Jeremy's stomach lurched as the world fell away beneath him. "Put me down," he cried. "Put me down." But Tiamat only pumped her wings harder. "Hold still," she commanded when he started to squirm. She sent him an image of a wriggling body falling from a great height. He held still. "Now look, look." Jeremy looked. The world that spread below him was beautiful, more beautiful than he'd ever imagined. He had no idea Blodger's Crossing had so many trees. It was greener than he would have guessed. "I love this place," he thought with surprise. "It's your home," replied Tiamat as she carried him over the park. He enjoyed the flight until he spotted a pair of familiar figures below. "Watch out," he said nervously. "I see Howard and Freddie." He could feel Tiamat's amusement. "They can't see you," she told him, using the same kind of images she had used to explain why his mother hadn't seen her. Jeremy wondered if that meant he was invisible while she carried him. He liked the idea. The flight was the greatest adventure of his life, and Jeremy couldn't wait to repeat it. That night, after everyone was asleep, he slipped out of the house and walked down to the barn. Tiamat was waiting for him. "Let me try riding," he thought, sending a picture of him mounted on her back. Tiamat agreed, and Jeremy found it far more comfortable to straddle her back than to be carried in her claws. Once he was settled, she pumped her great wings, and they lifted into the moonlit sky. Jeremy waited until they were several hundred feet above the earth to let out a shout of joy. Every night after that, Jeremy slipped out of the house at midnight to accompany the dragon on her journeys across the sky. Sometimes she went so high that the air became thin and hard to breathe. They flew into clouds, skimmed across rivers, soared over cliffs. Tiamat hunted on these nights. Out in the wild, away from the pets and people of the town, she would put Jeremy on top of a high hill and then swoop through the darkness, catching squirrels, rabbits, bats, and raccoons. The first time he watched her eat a rabbit, he thought he was going to be sick. "No sense in getting mad at a dragon for being a dragon," he told himself, turning his head from the gory sight. But even the hunting she was doing was not enough. She was over 20 feet long now and still growing. Soon she would need larger prey. "I have to go home soon," Tiamat told him each night when the flight was over. Jeremy would nod, leaning his head against her shoulder, trying not to weep. Once she folded a leathery wing around his shoulder, as if embracing him. Yet as much as he dreaded her leaving, he knew it would also be a relief. Caring for her had put such a strain on him that his mother had started to worry about his health. A week after the night rides began, Mrs. Thatcher announced that she was taking him to the doctor for a checkup. "Why can't Dad check me?" protested Jeremy. "He's a doctor." "He's a veterinarian," said Mrs. Thatcher crossly. "I want you to see a people doctor." But other than general exhaustion, Dr. Houland found nothing wrong with Jeremy. "Have you been getting enough sleep?" he asked, rubbing his bearded chin in puzzlement. When Jeremy shook his head, Dr. Houland scowled. "Start sending him to bed earlier," he said to Mrs. Thatcher, "and give him a mug of warm milk before he turns in." That was fine with Jeremy. He had been looking for an excuse to go to bed early. A little extra sleep then would give him more energy for his midnight flights with Tiamat. Not that there were many of them left. Soon, far too soon, Friday the 23rd of June arrived. The day of Midsummer Night was a day of endings, the last day not only of school but of sixth grade. Jeremy had gone to Blodgett's Crossing Elementary more than half of his life, leaving it when the thought that next year he would go someplace new was both exciting and frightening. The school gathered for a final awards assembly when Mr. Martinez announced that Specimen had won the first prize in the art contest. Jeremy clapped and cheered, but inside he ached because he had wanted so much to win it himself. He wondered if Spess would remember their mutual pledge that the winner would share the prize. Jeremy was leaving the building, still stinging with loss, and Mr. Kravitz stopped him. "Thatcher," he said. Jeremy turned. His stomach grew tight with the anticipation of something nasty about to happen. Mr. Kravitz paused. Then, to Jeremy's surprise, he nodded and said, "Good luck next year." What was even more amazing was that he sounded like he meant it. But even that miracle did little to distract him from the coming loss, and he spent the afternoon in a daze of sorrow. After dinner, he placed Tiamat's baby teeth in a small leather bag his uncle had given him several years before. He had found nearly 3 dozen of them, the tiniest no larger than a pencil point, the biggest nearly half the size of his little finger. Their soft, pearly color distinguished the fact that they were razor sharp and steel hard. Next, he took her skins, she had shed 7 times in all, out to the barn. When he had smoothed them all out on the floor like they were a diary of Tiamat's growth, he laid the first skin barely a foot long in the palm of his hand. It reminded him of the night she had hatched. "I was tiny," she sent the message, a combination of crystal clear image of the hatching, accompanied by a gentle sense of amusement. "I was frightened," he replied. Remembering that night made him remember the magic shop and something Mr. Elves had said to him. "Did she really choose me?" he asked. She replied with a flood of warm assurance. "Why?" "I liked the colors in your head. I knew we could share beautiful pictures." She poked her head, which was as big as a horse's, over his shoulder. "I will miss you." "And I will miss you," replied Jeremy, stroking her scaly nose. Beneath her left eye, he felt a piece of hard material. It came away with his fingertips. When he held it up, it sparkled in the light. "What is this?" "Dragons weep diamonds," replied Tiamat, turning her head away. Jeremy pressed the tear to his chest. In the distance, he could hear his mother calling him to come in. He glanced at his watch. Almost bedtime. Placing Tiamat's skins one on top of the other, he rolled them up, then tied the crinkly red bundle with a strand of yarn he had found in his mother's knitting bag. Next, he placed it beside the box in which he had carried home Tiamat's egg. Inside, saved as per the directions, were the pieces of the shell. Next to that, he set the bag of teeth. Jeremy looked at the collection of material, the box, the bag, and the scroll, and wondered if he should add Tiamat's tear, but the letter hadn't mentioned anything about this, so brushing away a tear of his own, he tucked the gem into his pocket. When he turned to go, he saw Mary Lou Hutton standing in the doorway. "I came to say goodbye to Tiamat," she said softly. Jeremy nodded. Mary Lou walked toward the dragon. "Farewell, Lady Tiamat," she whispered. Tiamat dripped her long neck, and Mary Lou embraced her. After a moment, she turned to Jeremy and asked, as she had several times over the last few days, "Do you want me to come tonight?" He shook his head. "I have to do this alone," he replied, as always. Mary Lou nodded. "Good luck," she whispered. Her voice was husky. He could tell that she felt nearly as bad as he did. Shortly after 11 o'clock, Jeremy tiptoed out of his room, carrying the box, the scroll, the bag of teeth, and a flashlight. With no Tiamat to intimidate them, the kitchen cats rubbed around his ankles, begging for a late-night treat. Ignoring their pleas, Jeremy slipped out the back door. The night was cool and still, without a breath of wind, almost as if it were wanting for something to happen. Jeremy didn't need to walk to the barn. Having sensed his approach, Tiamat was waiting for him in the yard. In the silvery light of the full moon, she looked enormous. They started walking. It would have been easier to fly, of course. Only they couldn't, because Jeremy had no idea where they were going. That wasn't for lack of trying. 2 days earlier, he had walked the entire length of Main Street looking for the corner of Main and not Main. As far as he could tell, it didn't exist. That didn't surprise him. He had lived in Lodge's Creek Lodge's Crossing all his life, and never heard of such an intersection. But its absence had worried him. How was he supposed to take the dragon to the corner that wasn't there? Finally, he had decided they would just walk along Main Street and see what happened. If the old man wanted them, odds were good that he would find them. They were less than a block from home when Jeremy heard a car. He dove for the bushes, no telling what would happen if someone spotted him wandering around this time of night. "Maybe you should ride on my back," suggested Tiamat. "Then no one will be able to see you." She crouched down, and Jeremy climbed on. In a way, it was even stranger to ride on a dragon walking through town than to fly with her. The air was cool and moist. As they neared the center of the town, fog began to creep toward them. It grew rapidly thicker. By the time they were 2 blocks past the main intersection, Jeremy could hardly see. "Too bad we don't know where the corner is," thought Jeremy to Tiamat. "Then we could fly instead of walking through this stuff." She sent her agreement. The fog got still thicker, curling around Tiamat's feet like snakes made of smoke. Jeremy began to worry again. He had a feeling that if they continued walking, they really would come up to the corner of Main and not Main. But when we do, will we be in Blodgett's Crossing or somewhere else altogether? The fog seemed to muffle the sound of T-Met's footsteps. Jeremy felt as if he and T-Met were the only things moving through the silence and the darkness. Finally, he slid off her back and asked her to fly ahead to see if she could see anything. She hadn't been gone more than a few seconds when he felt a great sense of isolation sweep over him. Come back, he thought desperately. He could feel T-Met wheel above him. The rush of her wings as she landed made the fog swirl in a way that was almost angry. Nasty, she sent. Jeremy put his hand on her scaly back, and they walked on. No need to ride her now. No one could see him through all this stuff. Soon the fog was so dense that even with a flashlight, Jeremy couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The flashlight was still helpful, though, because if he stood right at the base of the street sign, the beam reached just far enough for him to read the name. After they passed Oak, Ash, and Willow, something strange began to happen. They started to cross streets he had never heard of before, streets with names like Wand, Staff, and Stav. 2 blocks past Stave, Jeremy thought they had found the corner they were seeking. He wasn't sure because there was no street sign, only a narrow dirt path that led into a thick forest. The thing was, there was no dirt path crossing Main Street, and no forest in Blodgett's Crossing. Mr. Elves, called Jeremy. His voice seemed to vanish in the mist. Mr. Elves. No answer. He pointed the flashlight at his watch. As the second hand swept up to make 11:30 on the dot, a hooded figure stepped from the mist. Jeremy swallowed. The newcomer was tall, much taller than the old man he had met in the shop. He was about to run when the figure reached up and pulled back his hood. Jeremy blinked. "What are you doing here?" he asked in astonishment.